Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? I'd like to talk to you a little bit about how I use armor in my old school D&D game. Now, like I usually say, I use a 1E platform, so I use the first edition types of armor. So that would be padded armor, studded leather, elf chain, if you're lucky enough to find that, hide armor, which I let druids use because that will give them a little bit better armor class. It's equal to scale mail, chain mail, splint and banded mail, the plate mail, and then I add the two extra types of armor from Unearthed Arcana, which would be like the field plate and the full plate, which give you better armor protection. Now, I don't use the damage reduction that those armors have, and I think they even took the damage reduction out in 2nd edition. Damage reduction is a nifty idea. It makes sense, but to me it's just an extra level of complexity and extra little bookkeeping I have to do, like the armor has to be repaired if it takes so much damage and what have you. It's a neat idea, but I like to keep my game simple, so I kind of threw it out and decided I'm not going to use any kind of damage reduction when it comes to armor. In terms of shields, I do something just a little bit different. Normally in 1st edition you would have to, your shield would only count on the flank that you actually have it on, so it would be on, like, say, your left side. I'm not going to do that because I don't want to drag the minis out every single time and figure out where everybody is. So I just let like a small shield give you one better to your armor class. The other thing I do is kind of like what they do in Pathfinder or D20. Instead of having a large shield count against a larger number of opponents, once again, I don't want to get that complex. So I just say it gives you 2 better to your armor class. And that works out pretty well. I don't find it very game breaking. One of the things I do with those large shields, however, is I assume that only fighter types, like fighters and paladins and rangers, are proficient enough in those large shields to get that +2 benefit. So if somebody else is using one of those shields, say it's a cleric or an assassin or something like that, they're not going to get that +2 benefit. They're only going to get a +1 better to their armor class because they're just not used to wielding around that huge chunk of iron or wood or whatever. And so because of their inability to do that effectively, they're just not going to get the same amount of protection that a fighter would. Once again, I don't find that very game-breaking. I just think it kind of differentiates the classes just a little bit. The other thing I do with shields is if there's classes just aren't proficient in them, they're not generally supposed to use them, so say a thief picks up a shield or a magic user or something like that, what I'll let them do is I'll let them get that 1 better on their armor class using a shield, but it's going to come at a penalty to hit. So they're going to take a -2 to hit penalty because they're just not used to wielding around this big shield trying to protect themselves and attack somebody, because it takes a little bit of training. So that's what I do for them. You can still use it, but you're going to take a little bit of a penalty at that point. In terms of armor affecting stuff, now games like Pathfinder and D20 have really complex tables in terms of armor check penalties and the maximum dexterity you can use and all that sort of stuff. Some of the things I do use are for thief skills. In 2nd edition, they had a whole little table which, with the armor and how it affected your thief skills, and depending on what kind of armor you wore and what skill you were attempting, you had a penalty to that thief skill. So I use that because that makes sense. The bonus you get from that, though, is if you're wearing no armor, some of your thief skills actually get a little bit better. The other thing I use it for is, I was talking about the magic user and the idea that I would let him put armor on if he wanted to be that silly, but there's a chance of spell failure. Now in games like Pathfinder and D20, these chances of spell failure are rather small. So I actually looked around and I found ones from Hackmaster which are a lot worse, and I thought that was a lot more realistic, so I like to use those. And I even make the ones for shields a little bit worse than they are in Hackmaster, because I figure if you're holding something in your hand while you're trying to cast a spell, that's really going to mess it up. And the same thing, if they're holding a large weapon, then that's going to mess it up too. So maybe they can hold their staff or their dagger or something like that. But other than that, they really need their hands free to cast spells. And some DMs actually make you put your weapons down. It'll be a little nice sometimes and let you hold your staff to cast a spell. But still, the idea is that if you're holding something really big, that could screw your spell casting up. And one of the things I did in terms of arcane spell casting and why armor might affect it, I was wondering why would that be. And the thing I came up with, my little shtick for at least this current campaign, is the idea that magic users are channeling this magical energy from someplace. The 1st edition DM guide makes it really clear that the magic user himself isn't the source of this magical power; he's the conduit. And so my idea was the more stuff you have between you and the world, that acts kind of like as an insulator in terms of like channeling all this magical energy and magic-y goodness. And so that's why armor would affect them. That does have some fun implications too, because maybe magic users just can't carry so much stuff. They can't carry as much loot because that might mess it up a little bit. And if you want to be really funny, maybe some high-level spells need to be cast in the buff, which is pretty funny. So I'm kind of messing around with that. Now, of course, like things like elves and gnomes, classically, like if they're like a fighter magic user or like an illusionist thief or something, they get to wear the armor. And of course, there's all kinds of ways you can look at that they're just magical. They're a little bit different than people are. And of course, if you're an elven magic user, you might not be able to wear as much armor as you would if you were like an elven fighter magic user, because maybe you have some proficiency issues. The other thing I do with armor in terms of, like, I don't use armor check penalties or, like, specific tables. But, of course, if you're going to try to do something, you're going to try to run, you're going to try to jump across something, you're going to try to sneak past somebody if you're not a thief or whatever, you're going to make it a little bit more difficult. And I'll kind of, make those rulings on the fly in terms of, like, how much that armor is going to mess you up. One of the other things I'm kind of messing around with, but I'm not really sold on, is the idea of armor proficiency. And because in first edition D&D, it's made really clear that you're supposed to be able to use your dexterity modifier with all types of armor at all levels. It's not like Pathfinder where you need to get more proficient at it. And Gary kind of made it clear that the final benefit that the armor gives you, includes the fact that it's going to mess with your dexterity a little bit, so you still get your full dexterity bonus. However, if you look at the classes, it's pretty evident that people like fighters and clerics are proficient in all kinds of armor. They're proficient in heavy armor. Something like a ranger, well, it doesn't really say they can't use the heavier armors. A lot of times that messes with their sneaking around skills. So I would think maybe that rangers are only really proficient in medium armor, and maybe somebody like a thief or an assassin, they're really only proficient in light armor. And of course, magic users are proficient in no sorts of armor whatsoever. So the idea being that if you're proficient in medium armor and you put some heavy armor on, your armor class benefit from that armor is going to be one less than it normally would be, because you're just not as good as using it. If you're only proficient in light armor, then if you put medium armor on, it's going to be one worse, and if you put on heavy armor, it's going to be two worse. And if you're proficient in no armor, then of course light armor would give you one worse, medium armor would give you two worse to what your armor class normally would be, and heavy armor would give you three worse. I'm not 100% sold on that, but it's an interesting idea to kind of use. Should some of these classes that aren't supposed to put this kind of armor on, they still get like another little penalty for using the armor. And of course you have to then wonder, well, geez, how do they improve at that? Should they be able to improve at that? But I think it's kind of an interesting idea to mess around with. So that's what I do with armor. I like to keep it simple. I like to let the characters use their dexterity bonus no matter what kind of armor it is, if they're proficient in it. Because, that's fair. Because honestly, the people that need that the most are the low-level characters. And geez, if the fighter can finally afford a suit of plate mail at second level or third level, he needs that, because he's going to be the first guy the troll hits.